Hey everyone, it's Darth Nihilus here, back to you today with another video, and today I wanted to take the time to talk about the fact that Eminem should have released his Eminem Show album on exactly February 16 in the year 2002. Now keep in mind that I am not changing the year that he released that album of his, which was 2002, nor am I changing the age that he himself was at when he released that album of his, which was 29 years old. I am just simply changing the month and day he released that album of his because, in my own personal opinion, I strongly believe that most of Eminem's albums should have been released earlier in the years that they came out. The only two albums of his which I am fine with when he released them, and the only two albums of his that I make an exception for were or are his Music to Be Murdered By albums, both Side A and Side B deluxe edition of his Music to Be Murdered By albums, which were released on January 17 of 2020 when he was 47. That's the age he was at when he released Side A of his Music to Be Murdered By album, and then he released Side B deluxe edition of his Music to Be Murdered By album on December 18 of 2020 when he was 48 years old. And those are the only two albums of his which I am totally and completely fine with the months, days, and years or ages that he was at when he released both those albums of his. And they're supposed to just be like one album, like together. They're not supposed to be like two different albums because, you know, the Side A is just the standard edition of his Music to Be Murdered By album, whereas Side B is just simply the deluxe edition version of that album of his. But anyways, continuing on with this video, besides and other than the fact that I strongly believe and wish more than anything that Eminem would have released his Eminem Show album on exactly February 16 in the year 2002, earlier in the year than he actually did release the album of his, which was unfortunately on May 26th of 2002, which I personally feel is fucking stupid and retarded as hell, because again, in my own personal opinion and point of view, I strongly believe and think, more than any of you will probably ever understand in your entire lifetime, that Eminem should have released that album of his on February 16 in the year 2002. But other than that, the main and most thing that I wish would have been different about that album of his is that he should have put and released more songs on that album of his, even when he originally released it, which should have definitely been, without a doubt, on February 16 in the year 2002 instead of, or rather than, May 26th of 2002. He should have put more songs on that album of his, and I am really fucking pissed that Eminem did not release more songs on that album of his. Now, one thing that is interesting about that album of his compared to his previous two albums, being both the Marshall Mathers LP and the Slim Shady LP, he released, surprisingly, more songs on his Eminem Show album than compared to his Marshall Mathers LP or Slim Shady LP albums. And what I mean by that exactly is, on his Eminem Show album, if you count the number of songs, like actual songs and not skits, but just songs alone that Eminem put or released on his Eminem Show album, I guarantee you that you will count a total of 15 songs. Whereas on his Marshall Mathers LP album and Slim Shady LP album, he only had a total of 14. But even when it comes to his Eminem Show album, he still didn't have enough songs on even that album of his. At least, in my opinion, he did not. And especially on his Marshall Mathers LP or Slim Shady LP albums, he didn't have enough songs on those two either. And I mean, hell, I don't even think he had nearly enough songs on his Underground debut hip-hop rap album being Infinite, he only had a total of 10 songs and one skit on even that album of his, when, in my personal opinion, he should have had 13 songs and one skit. Because if he would have had a total of 13 songs on his Infinite album, then when it would have came time for him to release his Slim Shady LP album, which should have been at the very latest on November 13 of 1998, on that specific month, day, and especially most of all year, at the very latest, he would have had 17 songs total when he would have originally released that first album of his as a famous rapper. And then on his Marshall Mathers LP album, which should have came out on February 13 in the year of 2000, he would have had also 17 songs on that album of his. And then on his Eminem Show album, he would have also then had 17 songs. And the reason why I strongly believe that all of his earlier albums upon original release should have had a total of 17 songs on each and every single one of them is because it took him until the age of 25 years old to first get signed to Dr. Dre's Aftermath record label company, and it took him until the age of 26 to release his first mainstream debut hip-hop rap album, the Slim Shady LP. He didn't become famous until his late 20s, whereas most other old school rappers who came before him and became famous not only way before he did, but also way younger than he did, which I personally feel, in my opinion, is extremely unfair, especially considering the fact that Eminem himself had literally been rapping since the age of fucking 16 years old. But then it took him until the age of 25 to finally and once and for all be discovered by such a famous popular rapper and also beat producer, being Dr. Dre, who founded his own record label company on March 22 of 1996 at the age of 31 years old, and then signed Eminem to Aftermath Records on March 9 of 1998, when at the time Dr. Dre himself was 33 and Eminem was 25, but going on to 26, which he would have turned on October 17 of 1998. And because it took him until his late 20s to finally become famous after literally rapping for 10 whole fucking years, ever since the age of 16 years old, and then he didn't really get to become famous until he was 26, which is 10 whole fucking whopping years later, when like people like Nas or Tupac became famous when they were like fucking 20 years old. People like Ice Cube became a famous rapper when he was like fucking 17 years old. And Snoop Dogg was able to release his first album and at the age of 22 years old in 1993, but Snoop Dogg actually became famous at the age of 21 in 1992, because that was the year Dr. Dre released his first Chronic album. And Snoop Dogg, before releasing his debut rap album, Doggy Style, in the year 1993, was on like literally every single fucking song on Dr. Dre's The Chronic 1992 album, when at the time Snoop Dogg was only 21 years old. But then it took Eminem until the age of 25 just to simply be signed, but then it took him until the age of 26 to finally and once and for all release his first mainstream debut hip-hop rap album. And because it took him so fucking long to become a famous rapper compared to so many other old school rappers, and also another perfect example is Notorious Big, became a famous rapper when he was 22 years old in 1994. Big L became a famous rapper when he was like fucking, I don't know, 20 or 21 in 1995, when he released his debut album, The Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. And there are so many other perfect examples of old school rappers who became famous in the 90s era and generation of hip-hop rap music, who usually and normally became famous rappers either in their late teens or by the oldest, early 20s. But unfortunately, when it came to Eminem himself, he didn't get to become a famous rapper until he was 26 years old, which I think is really fucked up. And I'm honestly surprised about the fact that none of his fans, or even stans for that matter, unlike me, actually care enough about the fact that it took Eminem so fucking long to become a famous rapper compared to literally so many other old school rappers who became famous way younger and way earlier than he ever did, which is unfair, because I'm sure Eminem had been rapping like far younger than a lot of those other rappers were, or at least around the same fucking age when they themselves started rapping. But it took him way longer to become a famous rapper than compared to literally all those other fucking old school rappers. And there's many others. I just named a few here and there. But the point I'm trying to make is that because it took Eminem a long ass fucking time to become a famous rapper, I feel like it would have only made complete and total logical sense for him to have wanted to make up for that himself on his own like terms and on his own will, by putting and releasing as many fucking songs as he possibly could have on his earlier albums, which were by far, easily, and of course, his best and greatest albums that he himself ever put out or worked on, made, and released to the world, being his Slim Shady LP album, Marshall Mathers LP album, and Eminem Show album. Because those were his three greatest rap albums that he himself ever worked on, made, and released to the world. I feel like it would have made complete and total sense for him to have wanted to put as many fucking songs as he possibly could have on those three albums of his and onward, which, in my opinion, should have definitely been 17 songs in total. Because if you think about it, most old school rappers who were releasing rap albums in like the late 90s and early 2000s and mid 2000s and late 2000s, compared to Eminem, they were releasing more around 16 to 17 songs worth of a rap album. Whereas Eminem himself, for some odd reason, was only putting and releasing 14 songs on his Slim Shady LP album, 14 songs on his Marshall Mathers LP album, but then when it came to his Eminem Show album, he put and released 15 songs on that album of his, which is only one more extra song than compared to his previous Marshall Mathers LP or Slim Shady LP albums, which is weird and bizarre. But I think it would have been really fucking awesome, and especially, most of all, considerate, thoughtful, and generous on his part if he himself would have taken it upon himself to have put and released as many songs as he possibly could have on his earlier albums, and then, kept that going, throughout his rap career, which should have been 17 songs, even when he originally released those three albums of his, which should have been November 13 of 1998 for his Slim Shady LP album, February 13 of 2000 for his Marshall Mathers LP album, and then February 16 of 2002 for his Eminem Show album. And when it comes to his Eminem Show album, one song that definitely should have made it on that album of his, and if anything, should have been like an outro song to that specific album of his, and literally would have been a perfect closing or ending or outro song or track, in other words, to that album of his, would have been Stimulate. And he did release that song on one of the singles on that album of his, which I think was the Business single or something like that. He also released it on like his 2003 mixtape, Straight from the Lab. And it's just such a missed opportunity that he didn't put and release that really awesome, amazing song, Stimulate, for the closing outro or ending song or track to his Eminem Show album, because literally that would have made that album of his perfect by all means. I mean, honest to God. Because if you think about it, when it came to his Slim Shady LP album, he had a perfect closing song to that album of his, which was called Still Don't Give a Fuck. On his Marshall Mathers LP album, he had a perfect closing song, which was called Criminal. But then on his Eminem Show album, he didn't really have that much of an actual closing or ending song to that album of his, which easily could have and should have been his song Stimulate. And if he had put that song on that album of his, which he definitely should have done, and I don't think there is any denying that fact, not even for a fucking second, he would have had 16 songs, which would have still been one less song than there should have been on that album of his, because there should have been 17 songs total on that album of his. So he should have had Stimulate for the ending, closing song or track, in other words, on that album of his, but also one other extra song, somewhere in that album of his, so that he could have had a total of 17 songs when he would have originally released that album of his, which again should have been February 16 of 2002. And I don't care what anyone else has to say about that shit, because no matter what anyone else's opinion or point of view or belief is about what I have to say in regards to that, I don't care, because this is my opinion, this is my point of view, this is my belief system, this is what I believe. This is what I strongly believe should have happened when it came to that album of his and just his career as a rapper. He should have put and released 17 songs on all of his rap albums, especially his earlier ones, especially considering the fact that when it came to earlier rap albums that were released and came out in the late 90s and early 2000s, and hell, even mid 2000s, there was no such thing as deluxe editions for like rap albums. Deluxe editions didn't really become a thing until as like late as 2008. So when it came to like the late 90s up until like 2007, there was not really any such thing as like a deluxe edition for a rap album. And because there wasn't, that is why I wish that he would have taken it upon himself to have put and released as many songs as he possibly could have. Now, I'm not saying that he should have released any songs more than 17, because that would have been too many. But 17 would have been like the just really thoughtful, considerate, and especially, most of all, generous amount of rap songs to have put on his earlier albums, both his Slim Shady LP, Marshall Mathers LP, and Eminem Show albums, or all three of them, I mean. Especially considering the fact that, like I said before and earlier in this video, that most other old school rappers who were releasing rap albums in the late 90s and early 2000s actually put more along the lines or along the amount of songs of like 16 or even 17 rap songs on their rap albums compared to Eminem. So for that reason also, I don't honestly understand why Eminem didn't take it upon himself to have also, just like other old school rappers did, put and released as many songs as he possibly fucking could have on his earlier albums. Because other old school rappers were doing that shit, so it makes no logical sense why Eminem didn't. It honestly, seriously was a missed opportunity on his part. And it makes him, compared to other old school rappers, seem lazy. Or it makes it look and seem as if he was limited or even prevented from putting and releasing more songs on his earlier rap albums of his. Which, if that was the case, then that's really fucked up. Because it's like he was limited and prevented from, giving the world and giving people more songs on those albums of his that he himself probably originally even wanted to do. And if that was the case, then that really is messed up and unfair. Because it already took him so fucking long to become a famous rapper. Compared to most other old school rappers, that is. And, I don't know, that just really enrages me and frustrates me and makes me furious as hell. But anyways, Eminem should have put his song Stimulate for the ending outro closing song for his Eminem Show album, and also added one other, like, say, unreleased Eminem Show song, so that he could have had a total of 17 songs on that specific album of his. But that's all I wanted to say in today's video. Let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. I'm out.